Hey, it is Emma here from the Reconnected, and I am talking with Eleanor, my other co-founder of Reconnected Parenting, and we are going to be talking about healthy screen time. And this is a masterclass on raising children with healthy screen time and how to support kids to tolerate switching off screens.
This is such a topic that parents is often at the top of their mind most days.
Well, it's a real problem in our generation. It's a really it's happening to us. We're really like kind of the first generation of parents who are having to put in totally new regulation, boundaries, and awareness around what screens are doing to our families and to our children.
So what we're intending for you to get out of this masterclass is that you land in a place where you feel kind of resolute in your perspective around screens, because a lot of parents just, I think one of the main questions we get is, how much screens is okay, blah, blah, blah. So just landing in your truth around screens.
Yeah, your unique perspective, how they
Yep.
work for you, and
Yep.
where you feel good on a soul level of what
Yep.
you have put the boundaries in.
And
And
then that you have the skills and awareness to be able to enforce those boundaries, because
yes.
probably then the second challenge that parents have is actually being able to switch off the screens. So we're going to
Yes.
take you through a really great program today.
Yes.
And first of all, if you haven't met us yet, who are we? It's Eleanor speaking. I'm a counselor, play therapist, and breath worker. Emma and I founded the Reconnected and Reconnected Parenting 3 years ago. And since then, we have really been blessed to connect with over 50,000 families. We've taken them through our unique model of connecting deeply with the nervous system through breath and play. And this masterclass is a topic that is really it feels really present to parents at the moment. And so we wanted to really speak to how you can have screens working for you, and also have screen time being something that is causing a lot less tension for you, that it's something that the boundaries are clear and you can relax around them.
Yeah. So Eleanor and I also have 9 children between us, and I am pregnant, just about to have baby number 10. And our age groups, my
which
family,
which makes it sound like we're in a blended family.
but we're not. No, my family are the younger children. So I'm going to have a newborn. I will have an almost 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, and an 8-year-old. And then Eleanor has the older kids. So she's got the teens right into the early adulthood.
Yeah, 13 to 19, my kids'
Yeah,
age.
so it's 20 years of parenting, and also a blend of public school, Steiner school, and homeschooling. So we have a kind of real wide range of belief systems, understandings, and experiences, and what they all bring.
Plus, Emma and I have vastly different experiences personally in our own childhood with screens. So we're going to take you
Yes.
through kind of some of our personal experiences, how we've managed screens ourselves as
Yes.
parents, and then some of the things therapeutically that we have found working with families professionally.
Yes.
So, our two childhoods couldn't have been more different.
No, so I grew up on a screen. Even though I am 34 at the time of recording this, I grew up with a TV in my bedroom from, I think, around age 5. So my parents had a TV in every room of the house. Everyone would get their dinner and then they would go to their television. And I would wake up every morning and watch Agro's Cartoon Connection, for anyone out there who lived the same as me. And I would sit in front of the TV all the way up until I went to school. And sometimes I would even fake being sick so that I could stay home and watch the daytime soaps. But I was absolutely and 110% raised by screens. Even my time with my grandparents, always we had the midday movie, we watched screens at nighttime. It was just a really central point of my childhood. When I say that, I also did live a lot outside because there was kind of only like kids shows in the morning and kids shows in the afternoon. And so during the day, I did spend a lot of time out in nature and on the streets with my neighbors and cousins, because I'm one of 20 cousins. So we had a lot of us. But it was a really big part of growing up. And I was in the age group in my teens where things like MSN Messenger were really prevalent. So I would leave school and I would go home and I would connect the ADSL with a cord that would go into our phone. And then I would sit on MSN Messenger pretty much up until dinner time and on to bed. And that's where I kind of never left the playground. So I would spend time at school kind of going through all of this kind of hardcore relationship drama, being tweens and that. And then when I would get home, it would just continue on by chats, conversations. I would go into chat rooms. For anyone out there who has lived the same, we would go into chat rooms and ask ASL, which is age, sex, and location. It was like the classic kind of, it's kind of like you were on the street, but you weren't. You were just on the street on the World Wide Web.
Wow.
And I had older siblings as well. So I was really kind of pushed into the online world and given a lot of freedom. And it was only by pure lack of awareness, because my parents came from a completely different generation. My father's favorite story is he never had a TV growing up, and he actually lived on a farm in a place called Kenthurst in Sydney. And when the neighbors got a TV, they were 12 acres away, and he would go 12 acres and they would sit in front of the TV and be like completely enamored with the black and white one TV show that would happen on the day. And it was like the biggest thing in town, like the whole town would come to that one TV because nobody else had enough money to get one. So I think really he was giving us screens in every single room because he was like, this is exactly what I wanted. This is the lifestyle I wanted as a kid. And I wanted my, to have a screen and stuff. So it was coming from a really innocent place. It wasn't, kind of this sinister thing. It was just everyone gets a TV. So you have a completely different experience growing up.
I was pretty much the opposite. So my parents were quite radical for their generation, really into natural living, hippies, basically. And also my mum was an early childhood educator. And so she was pretty aware early on about the impact of screens on kids' development. And she, so we literally didn't have a TV until I was 16 in the house. There was a television that lived in the laundry that my parents told me was broken. And I'm pretty sure I used to be able to hear it every now and then, like on a Friday night. But to watch TV was, we would go to my aunt's house and watch a movie. And I can remember as a teenager, one of the first sleepovers, friends coming over to my house, I just begged my parents to let me borrow my aunt's TV. So at least there was a TV in the house, because it was just so abnormal. And it was like what you did when you went to other people's house was you watched TV. Whereas if you came to my house, you had to play, and it just felt like, wow, this is just it was so weird.
You were the aliens of the community. I know, that's so wild.
Yeah. But But, interestingly enough, what I remembered in prep for this was that when I was doing the HSC, you have to choose a personal interest project where you research a particular topic. And I did the impact of screens on childhood development. It was a topic that I actually found really quite interesting, which is really surreal when I think back, that when I was
Yeah.
17 or 18, that was kind of something I was interested in. But it meant that, for me as an adult, despite running an online business, watching shows and watching things was just never a something that I would turn to. It kind of just gave me a habit of what's the word for entertaining? I guess entertaining myself. But the other element was that it meant that when my kids were born, and it's funny to think that 20 years ago, so my eldest is about to turn 20, I actually did not get a mobile phone, until my youngest daughter was born, so probably 14 years ago. So there was a good 6 or 7 years of being a parent where we just still had a landline, like a phone with the cord
Yeah.
attached to the wall, um, and no television. It was when my youngest was born that I got a computer for uni, and we started watching some things on the computer. And then soon after that, I got a mobile phone. And so, you know, as a parent, and it wasn't that unusual. We went to a Steiner community, and one of the values in a Steiner school is, low tech. And so, it just wasn't that unusual to not have tech. When my kids were kind of in that first 6 to 7 years, tech wasn't a challenge. And so I just think one of the things that's fascinating is you have to, I think even 10 years later, you have to work quite hard to not have some form of screen around. I
Yeah.
think smartphones are probably one of the things that have brought in this easy accessibility around screens. Now, one of the things I noticed, like just over the weekend, just recently, I was in a major city, and I noticed walking around the shops with my daughter that most kids are pacified as they're shopping, as the parents are shopping, with a phone or a
Yeah.
device while they're
Or
in a pram.
going, yeah, or going to a cafe or a restaurant.
Yeah,
And my friend actually told me of a really unique thing that I was quite surprised with. She is a conscious tattoo artist, and she does tattoos based on intention. And
mm,
she had a mother come in with her 18-year-old son,
yeah.
and the 18-year-old son sat on his phone whilst the mother asked about the tattoo that her son would get.
Wow.
And it's like, wow, screens have taken away that such level of being able to communicate properly,
Mm.
when they've stayed in that person's life. So I always
I've
love to
just
give people,
noticed just
I
how
love,
different that level of, like, the way that we manage our kids now in spaces where ideally society wants them to be quite quiet, is now it's quite easy to just pacify them with a screen. Whereas even just 20 years ago, you didn't have, it wasn't as common to have
no,
small devices. And for example, when my kids were in that first 5 years, I was a part of a sport team, and there was 30 kids between all of the women on the team. We trained
yeah,
three days a week for hours. There were always at least 10 kids there. And I feel like it was one of the last times I noticed large groups of kids that had to entertain themselves, but also be quite respectful and quiet and aware of, like, the environment that was going
yeah,
on. But there weren't screens to do that,
yeah. Can
Whereas
I just say that there's a bit of irony around the being quiet thing? Because if you've ever sat next to kids
a
on
screen,
screens inside, the sound coming out of them, I'm like, I would prefer your child to be on the table screaming,
headphones,
you know?
headphones. And I was in the elevator the other day. I was just telling Emma, for like a 2-minute elevator ride, and I watched the parents handing the 2-year-old a screen to watch for this 2-minute elevator ride. And I think one of the things that is probably the most challenging is that I can remember how hard and draining it is to have little kids and to keep them occupied and to do things like go shopping or to do XYZ or to blah, blah, blah. It's like quite hard work to get the things that you want to do done, plus keep everyone happy. And now there's just this easy solution at our fingertips. And it feels like there's this huge change, I think, in 20 years for just how normalized it is for kids to be on screens
All the
all the
time.
time.
Yeah, it's
And not
really
just
insane.
for a Friday night movie or Saturday morning cartoons or
Yeah.
play school after. One of the things I used to be able to watch was at my mum's childcare center. They would watch Play School at it was 3:30. It was after school, and it used to have this natural containment around it, whereas now there is no containment around screens. They're
Yeah.
everywhere. They're in our pockets. We can't really escape them, and there's such an easy fix for every single parenting challenge that we have. So it can
Yeah.
feel so easy just to hand the screen over. But I think one of the things that is challenging for the community at the Reconnected is most people here have an awareness around screens, and so also carry a little bit of, and when I say awareness around screens, I mean want to minimize how much screens their children watch and want to be able to be with their kids in kind of counterculture ways.
Yeah.
But just the challenge of the guilt spiral that you have with screens when your kids are on
Yeah.
screens for too long. The
Also the
challenge
challenge
around
of getting them off the screen,
getting them off
not
screens,
pacifying them with the screen when you're feeling burnt out.
having going on these big like kind of what's the word when something oscillates, like going from okay, that's it, we're not having any screens, to then going, okay, I'm sick, so now the kids need to be on movies for a few hours. Okay,
Yeah.
then bouncing back, and there's these like inconsistencies with screens, feeling like suddenly you're all watching too much, then you want to come back and what's the word, pull it right back and go cold turkey on screens.
Yeah.
It's just like there's this continual like a lack of clarity, a lack of feeling like, yes, I know
Yeah.
how I want to deal with screens in my family. This is how it's happening. This is the consistent pattern. We've got this.
Yeah.
It's like this real challenge nowadays.
It is such a challenge. And I want to give you hope as well, because often when I tell people how much screen I got brought up with, they can't believe what type of adult I am. They're like, well, how did you get to where you are if you watched so many screens in your childhood? And I don't know, something just changed for me when I left home. I didn't have a TV. I went out into the real world, and I just realized that I didn't want to be a part of that kind of world anymore. So I got deeper into books, I got deeper into spirituality, and naturally screens just generally kind of fell away. Like I didn't have that need to pacify myself so much with the level of screens that I had grown up with. So there is hope. Don't ever think that you've completely damaged your children and they are absolutely 110% addicted, even whilst it may seem like that right now. But so I wanted to preface that before we talk about the kind of impact of screens and where we are at in society, and how we have a real, it's really up to us to reclaim connection with our kids. And we're up against a lot when it comes to screens, because we are burnt out. We don't have the community. We aren't generally kind of held. We have to do it all. We have to make the money. We have to do
I
the
think
dishes.
the pandemic was really challenging
Yep,
for people on a screen
absolutely.
level, because
Yep.
at home, for me in my family, the first time we bought a television for our kids, or for just a family TV in the lounge room, we've never had a television until the bushfires of 2019, I think, or what was the bush? We had bushfires in Australia, and you couldn't go outside for about 8 weeks. And that was 3 months before the pandemic hit. So it was like this, you know, it kind of just heralded this season of, okay, in the evening as a family, we're watching a series,
Yeah.
and it has become for us something that we do together now. But I
Yeah.
imagine, it's become really hard because parents, we were stuck at home with our kids for months and months and months
Well,
on
not
end.
only that, in public schools, I know that they have a choice now between learning to learn via books
Well,
and
plus remote learning.
pen, as well as learning on iPads and technology. So we're
Mm,
up against it a lot in a lot of different ways. It's coming in from all different angles. And from
mm,
the yogic perspective, we have moved into the Aquarian age, which they say is going to be more technologically kind of connected. We are going to be merging more with technology. It's going to be a part of our lives, but it's going to be really up to us to hold an anchor to how we integrate it and how we allow it to rule and control us. So,
the other thing would be good to talk about is actually just mobile phones. I think one of the things that parents often ask or think about is, at what point does my child have their own mobile phone? And
yeah.
there's that, what you said about the MSN, the not being able to go home, such a big
Oh, it's
factor.
so massive. So
Yeah.
I've read quite a lot of books on this subject because it's something that I've really had to explore, having 3 children. I do have a blended family with a stepson who has a very different home life of screens. And also extended family who have, a lot of screen time, TV. And I really needed to find my edge and my boundaries around what I felt was appropriate and awesome for my family, which has been a real journey because I've explored all the way from allowing my children to have their own experience of can they regulate themselves and how much screen can they watch until they decide they don't want to watch it anymore.
Mm.
Didn't work for us. All the way to,
What happened?
well,
Curious.
I started that because there's a ideology in radical unschooling that you
Of
allow children
self-regulation.
of
Self-regulation.
self-regulation.
Mm.
Yes. And I thought I would explore that when I was pregnant with my third because I had 2 smaller kids. And it just didn't work for us in the sense that I realized what is very different in this generation is that generally when we're talking about screen time, we're talking about going onto Netflix or having these kind of
Or games? Playing games or
my children have never played
not, so
games.
not games, but
No,
so
so
what?
not games. So they've been on Stan on Netflix. And there's this kind of, how when I grew up, it was VHS. So we would kind of watch a movie and then the movie would end. And there was a
Mm,
very specific moment where you'd have to take the movie out and put a new movie in.
mm,
On these new platforms, it rolls over immediately into the next one. So
mm,
there's no pause.
mm.
And I allowed my children to kind of go down that route where they were able to watch shows and stuff. And I realized that they were really just never coming to a state of self-regulation.
Yeah,
They
did you
were,
find that they self-regulated? Because I
no,
think
not at all.
it's a really common um, perspective, I think, in alternative communities that children will be able to control their
Yeah, and
screen
I
consumption.
and I did not experience that. And the thing that really, really triggered me about it was their play got completely interrupted. So instead of being in this magical kind of world of imagination and having these really unique and cosmic play situations where they were, creative and having, those kind of magic moments where you're like, wow, what are they even like? Where did they get that
Mm,
from?
mhm,
I noticed that it became completely scripted,
mm,
and there were characters from the shows, and there was, like they could no longer access that kind of magical play. It was all very much based on characters and this happened, and they were processing what they had seen inside the shows.
So there's something that's really key around that. I'll talk from the play therapist perspective for a moment. I remember once one of my kids' friends whose son didn't watch TV had gone to her grandparents and seen an episode of Thomas the Tank Engine, which you wouldn't think is very, it's like, yeah, that's benign. That's not a terrible thing to have happen. But in the storyline, a boulder came and like Thomas the Tank Engine was under threat. And then, you know, I don't actually know what happened. I assume it resolved peacefully. But the bit that this 3-year-old was stuck on was the boulders coming, the boulders coming. And he he said it constantly for days and days, acting, reenacting, acting, reenacting. And for kids who are under the age of 7, like reality and imagination are one and the same. They actually cannot really tell the difference between what they see on the screen and go, oh, that's imaginary, So for a child who watches like the train, that's about to be killed or potentially, it feels real. It has the exact same chemical reaction within their body as though it actually is happening to them and in front of them.
And you can see them when they're watching it. They are enamored. They are so in it. That's why people often try and get a child's attention.
And they can't.
And they can't because they're so in it.
It's then become something that they have to process through play, like as though it's a traumatic incident. And what's fascinating about imagination and play is, and this isn't my observation, this is an observation of a play therapist who's probably 30 years my senior, and so been practicing play therapy for more like 40 to 50 years. One of the founders, Victoria Axline is her name. And she said that within the last 10 years, it's been the first time she's ever had to, in play therapy, teach children how to use their imagination.
Yeah, which is so tragic.
Help them to remember how to use their imagination. Yeah. And I know, a lot of the kids who come to play therapy have parents who are up against a lot, and also, often are gaming, etc. Lots and lots of screens generally. And, one of the things that happens a lot in play therapy nowadays is spawning.
Because spawning?
I know, right? I remember I spent this whole session once going, what is this spawning? What is the meaning of the spawning? Trying to really like get the bigger picture of what this child was trying to express. I took it back to a colleague and she was like, oh, I don't think it was Fortnite, but that's XYZ game.
Oh, okay.
In order to, you die and then you spawn again somewhere else. And so he was just playing out that one thing over and over and over. There was no meaning to it. It was just his neural pathway, his most common neural pathway.
So I read the most incredible book, and it talks all about how that is quite literally an agenda inside the tech industry for children. It's actually called Kids Tech Silicon Valley. Like there's a whole group of scientists. There are people out there who are trying to create this neural pathway in your children to buy things, to understand concepts. It's called Who's Raising Your Kids by Susan Lin. And
is that the book?
Yeah, it's the book. And it's all about, she's done so much research and also activism inside that Kids Silicon Valley. So what I also noticed was that it's very hard as parents to really stay current and up to date with the content that is being given to our children through screens. And I relate this to this story that my mum thought she was so smart when I was a teenager, because she realized I was on these chat pages and that it wasn't, the healthiest kind of thing. So she thought, when I go to work, I'm going to take the ADSL cord. And so she would make me pack up the ADSL cord and she would take it to work. The day that she did that, I walked straight into my dad's room and I said, "Hey, Dad, can I have $10?" And he's like, "Sure." I walked down to the shop and I bought an ADSL cord. I unraveled it and I plugged it in. And I thought, fools. And
Hey,
it's
you know what? I went to
yeah.
a wedding once. I went to a wedding, I kid you not, maybe 3 years ago. And every single parent had their Wi-Fi in the car, had their wireless, what's it called? The modem, had their modem
That
in
is
the
so
car with
funny.
them so that their kids were not just loose on screens.
Oh, truly. But like,
Yeah.
kids are so ahead of their parents, right? Like they're so ahead of their parents when it comes to technology and being
Oh,
able
that's
to
how hard
navigate
it.
around
You
technology.
can't just say to a child, "Don't watch the
Yeah,
screen."
no,
There's
I
a
know.
there's a real pull to it, and it's that what I was talking about, the boy with the boulder. If we experience something that's traumatic or that feels unresolved in our system, we
Seek
need to go
out.
back to it in order to
Yeah,
understand it properly. And the
totally.
thing is, because there is no parent there regulating the child, the understanding actually never really drops in because there's no one there co-regulating with them.
And
So
it's
it's a
actually,
constantly unresolved
yeah.
experience.
And it's it's really hard for us to parent and up to date with the concepts that are coming through on these TV shows because they've got new episodes all the time. We're generally putting them in front of screens because we're burnt out and we want to do our own thing. So we're not
Mm.
really we're not going to sit there and watch the entire thing with them. The whole point of putting them in front of it is so that we get a break. So it's really like putting our children out on the streets, you know what I mean, in the wild, wild
Mm.
west,
Mm.
and just hoping that they stay safe. And hoping that they stay within the value system of what we're trying to teach them. And
Which is just not going to happen because the
it's not going
reality
to
is, for
happen.
example, something like YouTube, you go on YouTube, you watch two kid related things and then really inappropriate,
Oh, it's
intentionally
horrendous.
targeting children around sexuality, around
Yep.
violence,
Mm-hmm.
literally targets, literally
No,
our
I
kids are
know.
targeted. It's
It's
horrific.
it's really horrific. So we're up against that whole side of screen time where it's like we really are not in control of what our children are being fed on a subconscious level and having that neural pathway built around particular topics
We're
that
also
may
just up against their reward system, like the way
totally.
that the screens are designed now to give just a little bit of a dopamine hit and then you have to go back in order to get
Yeah,
more. So you're in a continual kind of reward seeking
as we can all
connection.
relate as adults as we scroll and watch our reels.
And it intentionally undermines your impulse control. So the more connected to your screen you get, the harder it is to say no, and the harder it is to feel like you can get that same dopamine hit elsewhere. It's like,
Yes. And there's also a really incredible book from Gabor Mate and what's his name? Is it Greg? Oh, I'll have a look.
which book are you talking about now?
It's called Hold On to Your Kids.
Oh,
And let me just have a look.
it's
What?
Newfields. It's Gordon
Newfield, yes,
Newfield.
Gordon
Yeah.
Newfield. And they talk a lot about the impact of screens in that book and how really our goal as parents is to be our children's central point of attachment and their central point of they come to us to ask questions and to get answers. They come to us for conversation. We're their anchor throughout their life all the way into their adulthood. And screens really, really undermine that because it takes children away from, they don't need to ask us anymore because they can literally type something in and get an answer. Or what I found to be totally intense and fearful was my kids were totally oblivious to that until they went over to a friend's house. And at the time, my son Atlas, who was 7, he couldn't ask questions by typing them in, but his friend showed him that you could ask via voice. You could
Oh, I hadn't
literally
even thought
ask
about that.
Siri. And so
Yeah.
when he came home and he's asking Google these questions, I was like, oh my goodness, we've just been thrown into the deep end. So, and that's what I mean by kids are one step ahead. You know what I mean? Like we think we know what we're doing, and we think we're tech savvy, and they are just a whole new level of tech savvy. But it's actually really important for us to be our children's central point of attachment, and screens really undermine that and take our children's connection. Like, it answers the questions for them. It's there for them in the moments when they just want to like tap out. It becomes the central point of their connection, which means that we lose all of these precious moments in which we can be a guiding light for them, which is really, really sad. But it's really important to be aware of that, I think, moving forward in this technological age. Is where do we want our children to be gathering their information from? Where do we want them to be connected to the most?
Especially nowadays, we haven't talked much about teenagers, but what I've noticed for kids now, if your teen is over the age of kind of 14, 15, and they don't have access to a phone, they actually get, it's really hard for them to get invitations to things. They're really socially excluded. A lot happens outside of school on chats, etc. And so going back in can feel really isolating when when you don't have those kind of external connections. So it's a really kind of confusing time as a parent, I think, because it's like, for example, I mean, the ultimate kind of hypocrisy around this all is that we literally run a purely online business, and our connection with you, the listener, is purely because of technology, because of screens, because of social media. So there's these positives, and there's also this reality that we want our kids to be able to participate in the world. We don't really want to remove them from the world, and technology and some degree of screens is actually a part of that moving forward.
Oh, yeah.
But there's this, I think for parents these days, probably the hardest thing is this internal conflict about what does line up with my values and what is my child actually experiencing. And it's a very challenging thing to have clear-cut boundaries around,
Yeah.
and then to actually, I don't want to use the word police, but, police it and actually be clear that those boundaries are being implemented.
Totally. And from what I have experienced is that children actually really feel much safer when there are boundaries, and that there are, there's a real decision within the family about when and where screens are going to happen, that they aren't kind of left up to be in control of their own self-regulation, and that we really are the anchor point of where they co-regulate with.
So you've gone from trying out like
Screens,
like whatever the word was, not unschooling,
self-regulating with screens, I
trying to
suppose.
see if your kids would self-regulate with screens. No boundaries, no rules,
Yeah.
access to all screens.
Yeah.
Trusting that kids can self-regulate, to feeling like boundaries are actually really key.
Yes. So we've moved completely in the opposite direction now, and our home life is so much more harmonious, and things that have replaced screens are absolutely in-depth Lego time, and creating PlayStation, like play. We've got these pillows where they stack them all up and they get into this play world and they go deep in that. They're much more kind of kinesthetic in their movement, when they're in that regulation zone. And we only watch screens one night a week for a couple of hours. And other than that, this is where I find screens to be really valuable and awesome, is as a homeschooling family, we lean on watching videos. Like recently, we got a whole bunch of silkworms given to us. So our screen time was going on and watching videos together about silkworms and where they come from. We got a whole bunch of valuable information. So instead of me throwing them to screens in a sense of burnout, I actually go to screens with them for a sense of connection. Because what I found was, when I was putting the kids on the screens because I was burnt out, it was a good idea at the time. But afterwards, the level of regulation that they needed to come into burnt me out
It's
way
never worth
more.
it. It's never
It
worth
was
it.
never, ever worth it, because children get into a freeze state when they are watching a show, watching screens. You can see it. They become mesmerized. They become lethargic. They're just
Tired,
completely tired.
bored.
Yep. They're completely hooked into the screen. We call it plugged in this family. They're plugged in. And so you'll ask a question. Hey, I'll say, hey, Atlas, like, do you want peanut butter toast? No answer. Because they're so enamored in the screen that they are not able to even hear what's going on outside of them. And then, so of course, what happens when those screens are turned off is that they need to expel all of that kinesthetic movement that they needed to have in those moments. They have to have it be processed outside of that. So that lent way more to heaps of epic wrestling, chaos, like chaotic energy, crying, like real just explosive tears about
Whinging, whining.
nothing in particular, fighting with their siblings when they don't usually fight. Just really, really chaotic energy that I realized, wow, this is so counterproductive to what I actually wanted out of screens.
Mm-hmm. I'm remembering, like, one of the things that I remember strongly about, because when my kids were toddlers, they were all really close in age. So the youngest was born, and then 2.5, 4.5, and 5. So 5 and under when they were all really little. And probably before my fourth child was born, so when they were all kind of 1, 3, 4 kind of age, we didn't have a TV. But there would be, I often look back at some of the days that we would go through together. You know, days where it's just everyone's just off, no one's quite in the flow. It's raining, so you can't go to the park. You know, there's no play group gets cancelled, so you can't do your usual thing. Someone's got a snotty nose. You know, those kind of days where it's just everyone's a bit off, or no one slept well, or someone's getting sick. And there would be these hours sometimes during a day where no one could quite find a groove. And then there would be sometimes days where it was just like, wow, we just had a week where we just couldn't really find our flow. And I look back on those days and the level of grit that was required. And also, it wasn't just grit, it was like, it was all consuming. So all of my time and focus and energy on those days went into the kids and went into riding these waves together, trying to find creative ways of dealing, like of keeping everyone occupied, trying to find something that would shift the energy. And sometimes it would just go on and on and on and on and on. And I look back and I think, if there had have been a television or 4 little iPads, or, you know, like, so many times I would have just taken that easy out, because it really is challenging to ride those waves of dysregulation with small kids, especially if you're the only person at home, especially if, you can't go outside for whatever reason, XYZ. It just would have been so easy. And I think that's probably the hardest part now. It's like when we hit burnout, there is this solution that feels like an instant, easy solution. It buys us 5 minutes. It buys us that half an hour. It buys us, I've just got to, pay a bill. I've just got to do this. I've just got to X, Y, Z. And it just feels like such an easy solution now is to use the screens to pacify, or to use the screens to just keep occupied. And because kids are often really keen for it, they will behave, they'll kind of
They'll suddenly be the good kid.
pretty much in order to get what. But I really feel for parents these days, because it just the level of it requires a level of personal discipline and a lot of extra grit, I think. One, to ride that time out, but two, to ride it out without leaning on screen.
And to make clear decisions. Like, I think that's because I can tell you now, our life is so much harmonious that we don't have screens all the time.
But was it straight away, or did it take some time?
No, that's what I mean. It's like you've got to kind of persevere through the dysregulation that has come in from screens. And you've got to reclaim the connection and the authority and the boundaries and the limits that were disintegrated through this attachment to technology and attachments to screens. Like, it's really that decision of showing up and being like, hey, we're actually not doing this anymore. So we do spend an epic amount of time outside, because we are blessed to live in a place where that is the norm. But it also meant having different options and having different ways in which you inspired the kids to go into their own play. And that meant having things like we have Lego sets. We have like a big bag of Lego. We've got lots of art supplies. We've got pillows that they can stack up and make into things. Oftentimes my kids find their own really creative solutions around, like, kind of strange play that they want to get into. We have a bamboo bush outside, and they go and they hit it and do all this, and they can get immersed in that world for ages. Then we just adopted a whole bunch of silkworms. So that's a whole new level of thing that they get into. It's about being really prepared to show up for them in providing spaces in which they can be enamored with and have fun and have connection.
Well, it's about inspiring imagination too.
Yeah, it's inspiring imagination.
This is one of those things about the Steiner world that I love. It's that in the the Steiner dolls that everyone in the Steiner world has. Maybe if you're listening, you might know them. If not, they don't have they have a very neutral expression on their face. So the forces of your imagination actually are able then to create in your mind what that doll looks like. And so there's this, like, the forces of the imagination have space to express. And it's like, even toys that have all of the detail added, that it doesn't leave anything to our imagination. It's decided, and so there's less for our imagination to do. So it's a difference between, I'm just trying to think of a clear toy difference. Well, anyway, it's just that when you give children a large range of fun materials that don't necessarily have this is used in this specific purpose, like this toy does this thing, you press this button, it makes this noise, it blah, 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 blah. And
totally.
There's a proper way of doing things. Then that is an implicit invitation to that child's imagination to come back out. I actually really wanted to talk a little bit about inviting kids to use their imagination. If you notice that your kids are using really like
Scripted.
television based or show based things, like if they can
Imagination.
only be Spider-Man, or if they can only
Yeah.
be, I don't know, whatever. I'm actually not very up on current programs anymore because my kids are so much older. But, you know, if they're only playing things that they have seen from screen, it might be worthwhile for you to spend some time with them, helping them to, one, have space from those environments so their imagination can come back online for themselves, but also just taking time and saying, using your own imagination while you are having connection time with them. So saying things like, let's pretend we're both dinosaurs, or let's
Yeah.
pretend we are stuck in a snow blizzard, you know,
Yeah.
things that are kind of really random compared to the usual narratives that they're in, and just inviting them into an imaginatory world. Generally, children with healthy imagination don't need that. And connected play that we teach in Reconnected Parenting is the process of joining your child in their imagination, in that world. And there's nothing more thrilling, to be quite honest, than being with a child in the unlimited nature of their imagination,
Oh,
because
it's what I would never give up again.
mm,
After witnessing the difference between the scripted imagination compared to the truthful imagination,
mm,
it's a world of difference.
mm, yeah.
Like, they are so creative and so magical, and they come up with things that you couldn't even dream of. And that is such a incredible energy to be around. And I noticed that it allows them to grow so much in themselves and their self-concept and
Mm,
their beliefs around the world. And yeah, it's so important to hold those spaces for them. And that may mean really changing things up. Like, it may mean literally, like, taking screens away for quite an extended period of time, throwing the screens out, selling them, getting rid of them, completely removing them from the household. We
Or
can,
might be as simple as, you know, containing it to a certain amount of time, like going back to the days of the ABC, 3:30 to 4:30 is the only
yeah.
time there's children's programming
Well,
on, you
something
know?
that we changed was, instead of having a screen available per se, we bought $100 projector. And when you project onto a wall, it's a really muffled looking texture, and they don't get the blue light.
Mm,
That really helped for the regulation with the kids, because they weren't getting smashed with that really bright
mm,
light.
mhm,
So that was a really good kind of weaning off process
mm,
of the different types of energy that they were picking up. And also, just, I completely removed all screens that we weren't going to use. So I just,
mm,
like, literally got rid of them. And also getting real about monkey see, monkey do. So what are the children seeing me do with screens?
mm,
So my kids now see me. I haven't really, for a very long time, just unconsciously kind of watched things. I'm generally always in a state of learning or work. But now they're really aware of, oh, mum's working, like she's doing this with the screen. So it becomes like a state of, like, that's what screens are used for. Screens have a purpose. Screens are there. And then I mirror that with when we, got the silkworms and we're watching silkworm videos, or we'll put on a topic. They recently loved watching videos about the water cycle. How does water come down from the sky, go into the earth? Just things where they were really learning from. And also spending a lot of time with other families who have same values as us and who don't have so many screens in their lives. And so all the children are playing this really kind of magical play where they're all in this deep imaginary land.
mm,
It was just a real decision and a real holding to that decision. And it was
mm.
based around, how
But
do I
it
want my
took a
family?
but it took a fair amount of time, and like learning curves, and, you know,
Totally. And
years of trying one way and
it
years of
meant
trying another way.
it meant filling up my cup and finding ways in which I wasn't going to throw to screens in burnout, that I was
Yeah.
actually going to feel satiated and present enough, even if it meant I was tired, to sit down and be somewhat available for them when they were in their play. And that can look like I'm actually doing my work, but they'll come in and show me their Lego creations. And I'm able to turn to them and be like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. Can you show me how that works? I love that. Like, you know, really affirming to them that what they were doing in that creative zone was really powerful. And then they would go back and then they would come back. So I was able to be present with my work and doing whatever I need to do. But I was showing them that I was able to regulate with them. Yeah, whereas I find that with like the real screen kind of plug-in is that there isn't that sense of connection. That sense of connection is totally lost.
And you know that there's a feeling that happens like, so you put the screen on so you can have some time to do something, and then you get into it, and then you can feel when your time's about to run out. It's like, you know, I'm going to have to finish this soon because, you know, then I'm not going to be able to leave them much longer. And no one's eaten for a long time. And, you know, we're all feeling kind of burnt out and rah, rah, rah. And there's a lot less of the easy kind of to and fro happening.
Yeah. So I think I just think it's really important that there is no right or wrong, and there is no typical standard that we need to get to as a family. And we're going to be more spiritually aligned if we only do XYZ with screens. And it really is a family to family basis. We have friends who have absolutely zero screens in their lives. Their children have never watched a movie. Then we have other friends who they only watch screens at a particular hour. And then in our family, we do it one time a week. And then we tap into it when we want to do educational purposes. And it's really about what is the decision that you are willing to make? What feels right for you?
I think as well, for me, it's like a huge thing is making an informed decision. So actually knowing what's going on, and then using your dissatisfaction with the way things are as something that's actually quite valid. So if you're struggling with screens, it's telling you that you are crossing a boundary within yourself for some reason, you know? It's like if you've got a feeling that you would prefer not to have screens, just ask yourself, so well then why are you crossing over the boundary? Is it that you have gotten into that kind of dopamine reward addiction cycle, and it's just, you know, you need to have a bit of a detox in order to cut away from that? Is it that you're using it to get through challenging moments, in which case what are the other solutions that you could come in, like actually just being kind of conscious about what it is that's going on.
How would you prefer things to be? Like, I think about that when you look at the kids who are on screens at the cafe, is that really, would you prefer them to grow up with this sense of needing to pacify themselves in those spaces? Or are you willing for them to learn that, okay, when we go to a cafe, we sit here, we connect, we have conversation.
And it's always, I think, like comes down to putting yourself first in a lot of ways, in the sense of, you know, what do you need to do to have the energy to get back into a good rhythm? And what do you need to do to have the energy to kind of ride out those more challenging times? Like turning off screens, it's not going to mean, oh, my kids are never going to fight, or we're never going to have hard days, or blah, blah, blah. It's not like a utopia and screens are the sole problem.
The demon. Yeah.
No, but it's kind of just become this, you know, I think it's just become one of the easy solutions, and parents are burnt out and alone, etc. So what do you need to do to counter that particular problem? Like, how can you have more energy to ride out those more challenging hours or days with your kids?
Yeah. So I want to give, when we talk about being informed, Hold On to Your Kids from Gabor Mate is a really good book. There's also a great course that I found through Instagram, which is Better Screen Time. And it really helps you. It gives you a lot of good solutions and a lot of good, like it even shows you how that you can like put on guards and safety nets with screens. Like, so if you're worried about your kids being, inappropriately guided around the internet, just things like that. And then the book Who's Raising the Kids by Susan Lin, which talks about the kind of more murkier agenda that is happening in Silicon Valley with kids shows and the way in which they market to children through screens.
And then if you're a part of Reconnected Parenting, using your connected playtime to just take a bit of a time to tune in on your child's imagination and whether they are able to initiate and create and explore their own imagination independently of the things that they're watching on television is a really good sign as to whether their imagination is being impacted by screens or not.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then if you are using the breath practices to regulate your own nervous system and find space within to be able to guide you in a way in which you would prefer to be. So you can use it as an intention, using screens as an intention and how you would prefer things to be. And then using the processes that we teach in Reconnected Parenting to help you find harmony and help you find your position with it and help you find your harmony. Because it's going to look different for everyone, but it's fully up to you to set that decision and stay with it. So I hope we've given you some just good insight and food for thought and thinking about it and kind of tuning into your yes and your no and giving you some hope and also some realistic parenting, quagmire that we're in, that we're all up against.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah,
See you
thank you
again
so
soon.
much.